participate.
Okay, there goes the recording. Thank you, Zoom. All right, as folks roll in, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping to get folks engaging right from the start. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Houle. I am the Director of Client Engagement here at the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, and I'm happy to be kind of emceeing this event between Gary and Kathy Boyd. A little bit about how today's event is going to go. We're going to go 20 to 30 minutes of conversation between Gary and our guest, Kathy. And we want folks to be engaging in the chat and the Q&A as much as possible. So if they bring something up in the first 5 minutes that you want us to talk about more, feel free to drop that in the chat. Any questions, comments, concerns, pushback, we want to be engaging as much as possible. So be sure to engage with us there. To get that conversation started, if everyone wouldn't mind putting their name and where they're calling in from in the chat, that would be great, just to kind of see what scope we have of folks here. I see a few familiar names in the attendee list as I'm waiting for folks to put those in. Brian Dozer.
Brian. Yeah, Brian, welcome.
Awesome. Johnny Martinez from Albuquerque. Welcome,
Bermuda.
welcome, Johnny.
Joe Mahoney. Hey, Joe, you're going to be in Saudi Arabia next week? Hope so. I'll see you there.
Fantastic. Josh Manley from the Urban Workshop. Awesome. Welcome,
Just so
Josh.
You know, Joe Mahoney was my facilitator. I went through in the summer of 2006, I went through the NIFTY program in Washington, D.C., and Joe Mahoney was my instructor, and we became friends ever since.
Oh, shoot. Joe will not be in Riyadh, but
yeah,
glad to have you with us today anyway, Joe. That's great.
Absolutely.
Couple more housekeeping things as we let more folks roll in. We are recording this, as you should have heard when you joined the webinar. And within 24 hours of the presentation, we'll be sending that recording along with a couple other relevant links in a follow-up email. If you don't see that within 24 hours, check your spam folder. Sometimes emails with lots of links coming from me go there, unfortunately. So just be sure to keep on the lookout for that. We've got Carlos from Norco College in California. Welcome, welcome, Carlos. Brett Crane from Maryland Community College in Spruce Pine, Mayland Community College in Spruce Pine, North Carolina.
College of Marin, awesome. That's in Nevada. Yep, we've got some folks.
That's great. We've got Kathleen Greiner, Dr. Kathleen Greiner joining us. That's great. And I saw someone else in on her name as well. Oh, that was Brian. That's right. Okay.
Barstow Community College. We got some friends there as well. Welcome, Barstow. That's Danielle. Johnny Martinez, Albuquerque. All right. Johnny, I don't know if you're familiar with the work we're doing with the city government in Albuquerque and the way they're using our Ice House program to teach city government workers how to think like entrepreneurs. If that doesn't sound crazy, I don't know what is, but they're doing amazing
great results.
Great results, yeah.
Okay, well, we're almost 5 minutes past the hour, so how about we get this thing started, and as folks roll in, I'll just keep an eye on the chat.
Sounds great. Thank you, Nick.
Perfect.
So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Gary Schoeniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We are the world's leading provider of entrepreneurial mindset education, training, professional and organizational development. Welcome to this webinar series, which is about entrepreneurship in education. I am super duper excited to introduce our guest this month. Is Kathy Boyd. Kathy is the Director of Career Education at the Orange County Department of Education, Orange County, California. As you're about to find out, Kathy is extremely passionate and dedicated to this topic. Kathy, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Gary. Glad to be here.
So happy to have this conversation with you. I've known you for a couple of years now, and you know, as we were just saying before we went live on this, I mean, the reason I invited you on this seminar, on this webinar series, is because, you know, there's so many educators out there, Kathy, that understand that we need people to get students need to learn how to think more innovatively and entrepreneurially. They don't necessarily need to start businesses. And that distinction is important. We can talk about that later. but everybody wants to do this, but people aren't sure how to do it, or the ways they're going about it aren't quite right. And you guys are doing some amazing things in Orange County, and I want other educators around the world to not only be inspired by what you're doing, but also to be informed by it. So I'm really, really grateful to have you on this webinar. I want to start by asking you, the standard question, like what put you on this trail, on this path?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say hi to two of my very good colleagues and friends, both Brian Dozer and Kathleen Greiner. And I actually need to mention Kathleen Greiner's name because Dr. Greiner is the one who actually introduced me to you, Gary, and to ELI, and to an opportunity for me to become, trained as a facilitator. But I have to tell you, I was just mentioning a little bit to you earlier, I sat through this training a while back and just thought, oh my gosh, these are my people, like they get it. Oh my, there's other people out there that are thinking this. And sometimes we just get trapped in our world, especially when you work in a bureaucracy, which I do and have since I entered education. But what set me on this path was more, I came from business maybe, and I probably just had a natural entrepreneurial mindset. And then when I came into education, I wasn't willing to give up, even though it wasn't anywhere I could see. And so I've always approached my own job and how I went about doing what I did with this mindset of how can I do things, make things better for kids and students. And so I found friends along the path, but really this training has pushed me to have a lot more conviction about it. And actually, because I'm in a position of authority where I'm getting funding from both the federal and the state level, I'm going to use that to that end. I'm going to make sure that we do what we can to infuse it. You said, Gary, students, and I'm going to say educators. I agree it needs to get to students. But before it can get to the students, my perspective is we need to hit these educators and give them permission, or make them feel like they have permission. I think they've always had it. They just don't know that they can do this work and that they can infuse this into classrooms and settings within all education environments. So that's my passion, is making sure that I take the position I have and use it in a good way to free up teachers from feeling so stifled and free up educators from feeling so stifled.
Yeah. So I want to maybe dig into something for a minute. You said you have a natural entrepreneurial mindset, and that's an interesting comment. And I wrote a chapter in my new book about like made versus born. And a lot of people tend to think that entrepreneurs are somehow born with some scientifically unfathomable dispositional traits. And looked at the research, and it really isn't, the trait-based correlation isn't really there. It's much more situational, right? And I think, one of the things that I wanted to kind of draw to your comment is that I tend to believe, based on 30 years of research, that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned, right? That we're naturally inclined to want to explore.
Yeah.
We're naturally inclined to want to fulfill human needs through our own efforts. Those are innate things that are in all of us, not just in some of us.
Right. We're naturally curious.
Yeah. The curiosity is like a natural thing. That's how we orient ourselves to our environment, right? So it's interesting that you just said, I have a natural entrepreneurial mindset. I just want to put a pin in that for a second. And we can talk about that if you want. If folks want to talk about that, as Nick said, I'm hoping you all will kind of chime into the conversation. But it's just interesting to me also, Kathy, how you have not allowed the bureaucracy to kill your entrepreneurial spirit.
Right.
I mean, I'm assuming they were, you were hired because of, not in spite of.
I wonder if I was. I don't know. I'm constantly surprised by the fact that I haven't been fired, I guess is a good way to say. I'm joking. I'm being facetious. But my point is that I did obviously find the first person who hired me in education after my business experience obviously saw something there. And I want to say, though, back when I was a student, I never got it. School was very difficult for me because I felt there was very like one way type learning happening in most of my settings. And so it was a struggle for me. Because when I say that natural, it's just maybe I've always thought outside the box. Maybe that's more appropriate. And I'm looking for a solution that fits with the way, and I'm just stubborn about it. So yeah, I think that I got hired in a way for that, but most people are, I guess, in the education setting, what I've learned is most people are willing to give up pretty easily. And I haven't been willing to give up. So I just, because I know this is right, I just go back to the human-centered thinking that I want all humans to be served to the best of capacity and whatever I can do with them. And this is the thing that's going to serve them. And I look at the detachment from our educators in our classrooms. And I have 8 brothers and sisters, by the way. I'm one of 9 children, and many of my brothers and sisters are educators themselves, and they're in classrooms. And so I get some really nitty-gritty conversations going on, and it's been great to have those kinds of conversations and freeing up. My own sister, who's an English teacher at a high school, last year during COVID, and some of the things that she was doing and going through, and having these great conversations with her with my entrepreneurial mindset hat on, and just saying, hey, what about this? And why don't you try this? And it freed up her entire experience. And at the end of it, a year later, she's like, Kathy, I can't thank you enough for having a conversation with me. And it had to do, by the way, with giving a student an F or not giving them an F. And talking about what that meant and what it served. And she really went through, and as a high school English teacher, I don't think she gave any Fs last year, which during COVID was a very difficult task. So, but anyway, my point is, I feel like, yes, it's very easy to give up in education systems because it becomes very much a check the box. Gary, can I say that statement that I love?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell everyone, I told Gary I would show this. I took my facilitator training and I used this. It's a little spiral notebook. I wrote very fast as Gary was talking through my different sessions that I was in with him, because I loved everything that was coming out of his mouth. One of the things that I still bring out in almost every meeting I have is this idea of an employee mindset and an entrepreneurial mindset. So I'm just literally copying what Gary said, but an employee mindset is someone else is going to tell me how I'm useful. I'm going to fill a predetermined role. And then in an entrepreneurial mindset is it's my responsibility to figure out how to make myself useful to others. And by so doing, I can empower myself. And I say that because that's very much what the conversation I used with my sister in the conversation about giving Fs. And I talked with her about her previous employee mindset and thinking of it from an entrepreneurial mindset and what did that look like? And it changed her whole outlook on things. And her response immediately was, yeah, why do we do this to ourselves as educators? So it's almost like a detachment from reality, because every human person I talk to take their hat off of what their role says they're supposed to do. We all are in agreement, but they put that institutional hat on and it changes the conversation somehow. So I think bringing that reality out is where I stand.
Yeah, and I think it's important. It's not to denigrate the non-entrepreneurial mindset. Let's call it like a managerial. I think a managerial mindset is sort of a useful comparison. And in some of the literature that attempts to correlate entrepreneurship to dispositional traits, they use a manager as the control group, which is interesting. But I as we were talking about a minute ago, the managerial mindset is also important, but it's now insufficient within a world that's rapidly changing.
Yes, that's very well said.
And so, it's important that we have to be able to become sort of cognitively ambidextrous, right? The trick to survival is to understand which mindset is required in which situation.
Right.
But we also have to understand, Kathy, I think what people don't get is that, the managerial mindset is rooted in deeply held values and assumptions around, let's say, replication and efficiency and productivity. It's a relic of the Industrial Revolution.
Right. Yes.
And if you're focused on replication and efficiency, the division of labor, once you understand those deeply held, mostly unconscious values and assumptions, right? That's what a mindset is.
Right.
Then you can start to see that That's a necessary, like the managerial paradigm is essential for the efficient replication and distribution of useful things. But it's not conducive to the development of entrepreneurial skills. In an environment that's focused on replication efficiency, there's no room for creative and critical thinking. It's
Right.
punished.
It is.
Right? But that sort of industrialized way of thinking that sort of came about in the mid 18th century has now become deeply embedded in our collective mindset, which is called culture.
Sure.
Mindset is our individual culture, right? And it's so deeply embedded, we don't know it's there.
Right.
And part of my theory is, Kathy, is this is why entrepreneurship education initiatives don't work that well within academic environments. Because when you're trying to sort of execute or cultivate entrepreneurial mindsets, but you're using managerial assumptions. It's hierarchical, it's linear, it's other directed, it doesn't work.
Right.
And you have to recognize those differences. And I think that's what you're really speaking to. Like, how do we create the environments that, one of the things you spoke to earlier was teacher burnout, right? You said something really important, like the human has left the room. Can you say a little bit more about that? What you mean by that?
Yeah. In the world I live in here in Orange County, we're talking a lot about universal design for learning. We're talking about social emotional learning. We're talking about self-care, and we're talking about all of those mental health topics that have become a very prevalent topic, obviously, during COVID, post-COVID, and I would say even just a little before COVID. But all of that is so important because I say the humans left the room. I think people are actually able to talk about the fact that the human left the room now, but we know that because we're not getting the results. We're not generating the results out of our schools and our systems that we wanted to, or we still want to. And I think that little by little, what's happened is so many educators feel so stifled, and they feel they don't have the permission to do what their passion or their heart is telling them to do. I'd like to think back when they started a job as an educator, that they had this desire to impact humans and human lives in a positive way. Yeah. And sometimes at the secondary level and post-secondary level, you have somebody who's really excited about the content area they teach too. I'm not, getting past that, but still, we generally, educators like people and want to help people. And I don't feel like, I think with all the grading and with all the rules and with all the hours and all that, there's just so much that they've become almost like robotic. And so, why I brought this initiative, learned to be a facilitator, and took my funding and gave it out to all my schools and districts so that they could provide professional development for educators on what the entrepreneurial mindset is and looks like, and how it can be incorporated into their classrooms or their settings. I did that because I feel like I need to give them a new sense of permission and what that does look like, right? It's not being talked about on the day-to-day. On the day-to-day, it's the attendance rate, it's the suspension rate, it's the grades, it's the checkboxes. And the checkboxes are obviously all important. That's all management stuff, and I get it. But I feel like we've lost the plot as educators. Why we're here is to impact human lives and to kind of instill that lifelong learning that every human has. Again, they start with it in preschool and kindergarten, and little by little, I feel like we kind of unintentionally eke that out of them by the time they're in high school. And I'm also teaching part-time at Chapman University. And I've got these bachelor's degree candidates that I'm just so sad. And so I talk about this all the time. I'm like, you guys, the way I can do this for you is I change the structure. I get really pervasive on one side. I do things so opposite of what they think, the whole grading system and everything. I just completely put it on end because I've got to teach them this, right? I've got this is not what it's about. And even if you walk into a system and you become an educator and this is what you're seeing, it's up to you to, take your passion, your heart, and make this, do what you want to do, and don't let go of that, right? Don't let go of that passion you have. So yeah, I think we need to do something for our education systems and our educators and around the world, but certainly if I can do it in Orange County, I'm going to try.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's so much to unpack there, Kathy. I was talking to you earlier about this, that at the risk of sounding like a Marxist, and I'm not, like, look at what Karl Marx wrote about worker alienation. And Nick, maybe you'd be kind enough to post that little ditty from Wikipedia, because he wrote extensively in like the 1840s, I think, about the reasons why workers become alienated from their work. They're alienated from what in Germany called Gattungswesen. It means species essence. And you're just a cog in the machine. You're not able to produce anything, meaningful. You're not able to express yourself in your work. And I was reading this and studying this and thinking, man, teachers and students are alienated from teaching and learning for exactly the same reasons. And that's like you said, the human has left the room. Like, that's what Marx was saying, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
180 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. But I don't think like these industrial era, like these managerial assumptions are so deeply embedded in our individual and collective mindset / culture. And that's the nature of a mindset that's so perplexing, Kathy, is that we learn things and we learn them consciously. And then our brains relegate them to habitual control. I mean, just that's kind of how the brain works, right? It's called automaticity.
Right.
And it drops beneath the conscious awareness.
Right.
And so it's like you have these values and assumptions that are driving your behavior, but you don't know they're there.
Right.
And so it's difficult to, this is like an important point I wanted to kind of flesh out with you. We were talking about this before we went live, like, education is everyone's problem.
Yeah.
But everyone thinks like, I don't know, I'm powerless to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And you seem to be saying like, oh no, we're not.
We are not powerless.
Right. And so, but this is so interesting to me that like once your values and beliefs like drop beneath your conscious awareness,
right.
The nature of a mindset is to enable us to think without thinking.
Right.
Right. Once it drops beneath our conscious awareness, we're not aware it's there. And that's fine when the future looks like the past, like your mindset becomes a self-perpetuating mechanism.
Right.
That's fine as long as the future looks like the past. But guess what? The future doesn't look like the past.
No, yeah.
But because we're not aware of the ways in which our deeply held beliefs are producing the outcomes they produce, we're likely to respond inappropriately to adaptive challenges.
Right.
Right. We want to blame, we go backwards, we want to stick our head in the sand, we want to double down, which is what we see. And this is what Einstein was trying to say. You can't solve the problem with the same thinking you created it. Can't solve adaptive problems with technical skills.
Right.
So like faster, better, cheaper works. That's a technical solution to a technical problem. But it's not really going to help in an adaptive with an adaptive challenge. So what can teachers do, Kathy? You just said like we're not powerless. Like what ideas do you have that can empower an ordinary educator to be more to cultivate entrepreneurship in the classroom? Like, do you have any ideas on that?
Well,
in spite of the system. Right?
Yeah. By the way, my background in the setting of the school system was I went from business. I worked for human resources placement services, where I was placing people in jobs, specifically in business and then the accounting arena. And then I was going from a master's in business administration and I decided to switch into a master's in counseling program. I went into school environments and I actually interviewed people in different job settings to find out what was most interesting to me. I knew I didn't want to teach full time. That just wasn't where my heart was. And since I have so many educators in my family, I thought, I'm just going to use my connections and interview people. And I did. And I came down to school counseling. So I spent many years as a school counselor, and then I was a school site administrator. And I was both in Orange County and Los Angeles. And I've ended up here in Orange County at the county office. So I help schools and systems in that way. But repeat your question, because I got torn.
No. It's like, so what can the average
what can they
educator
do? Yeah.
Right.
So,
in spite of the system.
So when I was a counselor, I was doing human-centered design thinking. That's kind of my answer. Human-centered design thinking, I didn't even know it. I didn't know what the label that was. And then as a county office employee, my entire focus, everyone, my team, I have a team about 30 here. Everything is approached through human-centered design thinking. So it's, again, back to the entrepreneurial mindset where you're talking about solving problems. Everything is about solving problems. And when you were just speaking, Gary, you just reminded me of a conversation I was having earlier this morning with some of my staff, because I've got my staff trained, and everything we face, we just ideate. And within ideation, there are no bad ideas and there are no barriers, right?
Right.
Everything's possible. And so within that setting, we come to some pretty awesome solutions. And it's so exciting because when you get a whole group of people, and that's what I've been able to do, is develop a whole team of people that only ideate around things. And kind of like, there are no limitations, there are no impossibilities. And so we were reminded of a conversation this morning when we brought something up and we're going to do it. And we've created all the tools and the resources and taking all the lift out for educators. And you still have those, I'm going to use the term fixed mindset. I'm going to use, I don't even know if it's fixed mindset, because I think it's just the way we're taught to think, like you're saying, that's just our nature to start thinking with barriers in mind. But I'm trying to now train my staff. Okay, when somebody says something like that, let's figure out the most non-threatening way to get them back to the ideation stage, right? Because if they can sit in ideation stage and not worry about the barriers will come when you're trying to implement it, and we'll help them overcome it. But that 100%. Doesn't need to be part of what you think can be, dreaming of a solution.
That's a super important point, Kathy. Like you can't be thinking about all the reasons it's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
While you're trying to solve a problem. I mean, it's a conundrum, but it'll definitely, I mean, that's a really, really important point. Like, it's also an important point. I mean, that's the basis of resilience, is optimism.
Sure.
Right. And one of the points I was talking about somebody else recently, I probably interviewed 500 or 600 entrepreneurs in the last 10 or 12 years. And everyday entrepreneurs. I'm not really interested in the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezos of the world. I really am interested in how ordinary people who have no particular advantage do it. And I was talking to a guy out in Seattle a couple weeks ago, and Mike Skinner, who runs our program up in a nonprofit in Seattle. But I was saying, like, when you listen to entrepreneurs, these underdog entrepreneurs, everyday entrepreneurs, what's important is not only, so I have to act like an anthropologist, like, because the entrepreneurs don't know what they know.
Yeah.
And you can't just like ask them, how did you do it? Because they're just going to tell you, I worked really hard and never gave up. It's like that, not that useful, right? But what's important, Kathy, is what they're not saying is as important as what they are.
Right.
And my point is, they're not really focusing on the obstacles.
Yeah.
They're focusing on I got to find a way. You can hear it in their language. I mean, from an anthropological perspective, you can hear it in the language. I got to find a way. I got to learn something. I got to try harder. I got to come at it from, there's that optimistic interpretation of the challenge, which is really, really important. One of the ideas I have in my new book that I wanted to run by you is I'm thinking about, like, advice to an educator is like, on one hand, I want to give advice to a teacher. Like, what can you do in spite of the system? And then I have a message for administrators, like, an academic leaders, like, here's how you should, accommodate this. And this is going back to my premise that you need both. You need a managerial mindset and you need an entrepreneurial mindset. But the managerial culture paradigm, let's say, is not conducive. So we have to create these environments that are conducive to the development of the entrepreneurial, which are the discovery skills, right?
Right.
And so the idea I wanted to run by you, Kathy, is in kind of just, taking a risk in public here. But one of the ideas is to encourage the teacher to encourage students to undertake entrepreneurial projects of their own in the margins. Like, it doesn't even have to be part of, it's voluntary. You're not getting graded for it. You're not getting extra credit for it. You just, or maybe you can give extra, whatever. I mean, you want to be careful about the extrinsic rewards, but
yeah,
right. But just what we want the students to experience is the joy of learning. Like, nature rewards you for pursuing your own interests.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I'm doing that very much in my class at Chapman University. The way the whole class is structured is I don't lecture. I break up every chapter when we meet each week, and I break them into groups of 7. And so they have 2 or 3 partners, and they teach back the section of the chapter that, and I've provided this supplemental notebook of resources and links and videos and things that relate to that chapter that make the teach back more engaging. But it's this amazing transformation in the beginning of a class to see what happens by the end of the class with these students, where you're putting no limitations on what they do. And that self-exploration, or in the margins that you're talking about, is happening all over the place. I didn't have to give them point value because I made it related to their life. I said, your job when you're teaching back, this book was written in 2014. I don't want to know what they said in 2014. I want to know what you're reading. How does that relate to today? How can you give some example of what that looks like in your life as a college student, and talk about this content through the lens of who you are and what that could mean? And so it's very interesting to see them do something like that. But you can do that in so many different ways. That was just one small example in any classroom or in any setting. And it's so exciting to see them. You're empowering them, and you're giving them so much of a voice, and you're bringing in who they are. Their human person comes in, your human person interacts with them. And it's so exciting for both ends, right?
We're bringing the human back into the room.
Yeah, it really is. It's so much fun. I enjoy my classes. I learn so much. I'm the professor, whatever, but I'm learning so much from my students because I'm allowing them to bring what they know about any topic into the conversation. And, none of us know enough about anything, to be honest with you. So,
well, what you're saying, speaks to something important. Like, I'm going back to, I'm a mindset guy, right? Like, and I define this, mindset as a deeply held beliefs and assumptions that, we assume to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel. Right?
Yeah.
What part of what I'm trying to point out at my work, Kathy, is that, from the moment we set foot in school, it is assumed that someone else is going to tell us what we need to learn and do in order to be successful in life. But that assumption, we acquire that assumption unconsciously and uncritically.
Yeah.
Right? It's just baked into the system. It's assumed that you are going to work in an established organization where the useful thing is already known, it's already been established. And so you don't need useful thing finding skills, which are entrepreneurial.
Right.
You don't need delivery skills. And so it's assumed that you're going to fulfill a predetermined, well-defined role, that you're going to function in this. You're either going to learn or work in an other-directed, routinized environment. And that's a relic of the past. But we fail to see, as educators, as organizational leaders, the extent to which those assumptions are undermining the very attitudes and skills we're trying to develop in our students.
Exactly. Yes.
Right? It's that environment is just not conducive.
Yeah.
What do I got to do to get the A is a managerial mindset.
Yes.
I'm not thinking for myself. I'm not, as soon as I memorize, and Nick, maybe you can post this in the notes here, but one of our colleagues, Rob Hernan, the president of Eli, brought forth an article about lectures, like you don't remember it, but students enjoy the lectures more than they enjoy interactive learning sometimes, even though the studies show they're not learning anything from the lecture. They're having more fun in the lecture, but they're not retaining as much. They're not learning as much. It's really interesting, that conundrum there. But I think, Kathy, immersing people, to my way of thinking, everything you know about entrepreneurship is wrong, right? And so many people equate it to like risk.
Yeah.
Like existential risk.
Right.
And I'm saying like, no. If you look at entrepreneurs, what they're doing is don't quit your day job, don't drop out of school, don't mortgage your house or jeopardize to your economic future. Experiment in the margins.
Right.
To just use your discretionary time and thought and effort and resources to figure out how to make yourself more useful to more humans. But do it in the margins. Don't, this is sort of the Jim Collins thing, like keep what you got going.
Yeah. And that's probably why I haven't been fired, right? I am doing it in the margins. And so, I apply my managerial mindset to the things I know I need to do from any institutional perspective that I live in. And then I just do the things on the side, which, by the way, is the reason that's my incentive. That's what keeps me going. That's what feeds my soul, is the margin work. And then little by little, I get to eke what's in the margins into the center, in the managerial style stuff. And, then you have a lot more leniency as you have success going down the road. So anyway, I love what you just said. Thank you for that.
No, I love what you just said, Kathy, because that's it. Like, that's where let's use Nick for an example. Like, I'm always encouraging folks that work at Eli to like have side hustles and undertake, eat their own dog food, so to speak. And Nick launched this podcast, about music, and it's gotten like really good traction really immediately. And
we just hit 1,000 downloads yesterday.
Like 2 weeks in, right? It's just like
a weekend, 1 weekend.
One weekend. I mean, it's going places. Yeah. And I was saying to Nick, like, I'm so grateful that you have that experience. Like, when we create something ourselves that other people find useful, that's like rocket fuel.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like, that's where that desire is in everybody. And I think what happens to so many of us is that we sort of tamp that down by, through like materialism. We buy things, we look forward to our next vacation, we sort of placate, you know what I mean? But that desire is there. And the question I like to ask folks, Kathy, and I know Nick showed up because we've got questions here, but what happens to a human being when learning and work become a source of like joy and meaning and growth?
Mm-hmm.
Where it becomes, thank God it's Monday instead of thank God it's Friday.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like the same person.
Yeah.
Versus the same person who would look at like learning as drudgery. They look at work as a necessary evil. Oh, I got to do this to pay the bills. If I didn't need the money, I'd win the lottery. I'd be on the beach somewhere drinking, margaritas. Like,
now, I know Nick needs to jump in, but I have to make your point really relevant because it just happened. I just hired a principal. She's been with me 1 week. She just left a principalship at an Orange County high school. Mm-hmm. And her husband has complained to her, or she's complained to her husband, on a regular basis, it's only Tuesday.
Yeah.
Every day since she started this job, she goes, oh my God, it's Tuesday. You know what I mean? He's like, I cannot tell you, to his wife, the difference I am seeing in you now that she's walked into an environment where it's just very ideation centered. It's very, anything's possible, and what it's done to just her human self in a matter of, weeks here. And she's just like, I can't believe what a transformation this is doing to my life. And it was a perfect point to your story, from a principal to a very open-centered entrepreneurial mindset, ideation team environment.
And I'll just put one little cherry on top of that Sunday. Your point, Kathy, demonstrates what I've been saying for years. Like, there's a vast reservoir of untapped human potential that we're not getting to with this managerial hierarchical way of thinking. The command
Right.
and control just doesn't allow. There's a trade-off to be made. When you focus on efficiency, that's fine, but you're giving up something else. That's kind of how I think about it. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. Nick, what do you got?
Well, I wanted to jump in with my own thought about kind of what you were just talking about. And Kathy, your story actually further validates why I'm bringing this up. So to bring Marx back in for a second, a lot of people misattribute Marxism with people who don't want to do work. And that's not the case at all. In fact, Marx is all about labor is actually innately within us. We want to be doing work for humanity. So that's not the problem. It's when we divorce ourselves from, as Gary was pointing out earlier, those skills of finding the useful thing to do and collaborating and being in the ideation phase. So it's right on board with that. To tie into that, Rashid commented a little bit ago when we were talking about pessimism versus optimism. And he says, I actually do focus on the negative and red flags while I'm ideating. And before I finish this question, Gary, this reminds me of our conversation earlier today about the person you're kind of help mentoring. So maybe you could loosely reference that too. Understanding the limitations in being solution oriented around those usually produces a result that's already accounted for the potential pitfalls. I don't necessarily see this as pessimistic, but more realistic. I tried to get my team to balance form and function.
So I think if I understand you correctly, Nick, what you're speaking to, or what the comment speaks to is or doesn't speak to, is something I've said over and over again, that being innovative and entrepreneurial requires some modicum of irrationality. That what was the George Bernard Shaw quote? Like something about like the normal person expects himself to conform to the world, and the other person expects the world to conform. The unreasonable man expects the world to conform to him, and like therefore all progress relies on some modicum of unreasonableness. And it's a nuance in here. It's worth thinking about. But I'll go back to
There's
something.
The quote, if you want to read it in full.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Yeah, but Brian Scudamore is one of the guys I interviewed in 2010. He's the founder of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and he started an 18-year-old kid with $1,000. Had no idea what he was doing, none whatsoever, which is very, very typical. And this reminds me of a quote, and I'll just pause in the story for a second. There's a quote from Anatole France that speaks to the comment, which is, I prefer the errors of enthusiasm to the indifference of wisdom. Mm. And it's another sort of quote that speaks to the George Bernard Shaw thing. But Brian said, his company, the 1-800-GOT-JUNK, it was called the Rubbish Boys initially. He was stuck. It wasn't really going anywhere. And he said he just went out to his parents' cottage, sat on a dock, and with a legal pad, and wrote out, like he just said, I let myself think. And he specifically said this, Rashid. He said, I didn't allow myself to think about what could go wrong, what I needed, what I didn't need. I just let myself think about what could be. And he said, it just started coming to him, and he came up with this idea. We could become the FedEx of junk removal, which he's essentially done. But the point is that when our brains are future oriented towards a positive outcome, this is called prospection theory. There's some literature around this. Maybe Nick, you can find that paper about navigating the future or driven by the past. When our brains are oriented towards a future positive outcome, we're able to access unprecedented problem-solving abilities that aren't otherwise available to us. So that's the importance of just allowing yourself to just think about what could be. Now, to Rashid's point, micro experimentation is the way forward now. And so you reduce the cost of failure through tiny little experiments. You try lots of little things, which is essentially biomimicry. I mean, that's how organisms orient themselves in unfamiliar terrain. And this brings me back to a point, Kathy, that the difference between entrepreneurial and managerial thinking, entrepreneurial discovery requires error-based learning. There's not much room for that in formal education. That's punished.
It's punished.
It's the micro experiments that provide micro failures that provide a feedback loop that allow you to home in on what does actually work.
That's
back to my English teacher sister. Remember I told you the F's and she ended up not getting F's. And my question to her was, Jenny, sorry, that's her name. I said, Jenny, it could be that the people that are not doing well in your class that have a 5%, they haven't been able to access the learning in the way that you've given them. You've given them a very structured way of learning the content. Might you ask them to provide any sort of evidence that they've learned something in your class? This is towards the end of the year. And genuinely look at what they give you to see if they have given you something that satisfies some learning that would allow you to pass them. And with that experiment, giving them that totally open-ended and opportunity is how she got to the point where she didn't have to fail any student. And that's a pretty big statement for a high school English teacher in our area anyway.
Yeah. That gives me an opportunity to introduce the idea of implicit learning, which is the vast majority of what we know and learn happens implicitly, which means without effort or awareness. And as it turns out, our brains are much more adept at implicit learning because we've been doing it for millions of years before we ever had written language or the spoken word. And I dug into this quite a bit. Arthur Reber is a scholar who wrote a fantastic book about implicit learning. I think that's the name of it, Nick. If you could post that, I'd be grateful. But what's interesting, Kathy, what you're saying about Jenny is that implicit learning relies on entirely different neural processes in the brain. And guess what? It's IQ independent. A dog can do it as well as you can. Right? So that's a genius answer to what that you gave to your sister, because the learning is happening without effort or awareness. And that's the beauty of entrepreneurial learning.
Right. And what it did for those, however many humans that was, let's just say 20 in all of her different sections of English classes, whatever that did for me, that may have been the first validating experience they've had ever, or maybe certainly in a long time, that they actually have something to bring to the table.
There's another important point to be made here, Kathy, and that is that entrepreneurship education is particularly relevant to people who aren't doing well in school.
Yeah.
Like, very successful entrepreneurs are very often C students, right? And Nick, maybe you can find that link. I posted an article about like, how do you deal with kids that don't do well in school? Like, what does the future hold?
Yep. That's on our website. I'll grab that right now.
Thank you. That's an important point about entrepreneurship education. It's a different kind of learning, and it kind of levels the playing field. Because, I mean, this is a theory. I don't have data for this, Kathy, but the kids that are doing really, really well in school are probably going to be less entrepreneurial than the mediocre students, because they're thriving in a system that's working for them.
Yeah.
Which is another point. If what you're doing is working well and you're satisfied and fulfilled, then keep doing it.
Great. Yeah.
Don't mess with it.
Sure.
I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Sure.
I mean, that's an important point to be made. And that's why so many successful entrepreneurs hail from hardship and difficulty and adversity.
Right.
There's a powerful incentive. I think you spoke to it earlier, that we're not great students, and we figure out, like, I've got to figure out how to make myself useful outside of the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Rashid followed up and agreed with the importance of the vision stage. He was talking more in Icehouse Eli terms. We call this kind of the second phase of the opportunity discovery process, where you're really doing a lot of micro experimentation. And so I wanted to point that out. And the story I was alluding to earlier is the importance of doing something like unit economics. What's the basic cost of doing? Okay, that's a cool idea. What's the basic cost of doing it? You can very quickly figure out what your break even would be. That doesn't require, a master's degree or an MBA.
Sure.
The basic heuristic.
Yep.
But even before that, Nick, let's take one step back. And Kathy, you know, are talking about this before we went live, like, you know, in a managerial mindset, broadly speaking, assumes that someone else is going to tell me what I need to learn and do in order to be successful. That's sort of a core assumption of the managerial mindset, let's say, whereby the core assumption of the entrepreneurial minded person is it's up to me to figure out how to make myself more useful to more humans.
Yeah.
And the more useful I become, the better off I'm going to be. Right? I don't mean better off in terms economically.
No.
I mean better off holistically.
Yeah, like in your core.
In your core, like you get to fully express, to live, to be authentic and live fully human, and you know, to experience the psychological well-being, the social integration that comes with that. So I think it's important to understand those two assumptions, but we don't realize we have those assumptions, and to the extent to which they guide our behavior.
Yeah.
Right.
I need you to repeat that. We don't realize.
So we don't realize that that's the conundrum in the mindset. Like it's, let me take a step back to explain it, Kathy. I'm using Edgar Schein's 3-level model to explain culture, to explain mindset, because they're the same thing, collective or individual. Level 1 is on the surface. That's the top of the iceberg. That's what you can see. Those are what he calls visible artifacts and observable behaviors. Level 2 is just beneath the surface. This is our espoused values and our conscious beliefs. But level 3 is where we find our deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions that we don't know we have. And what Schein points out is that what shows up on the surface is not the result of our espoused values, which he basically describes as those are like cognitive distortions and mental gymnastics, how we sort of rationalize our behavior. What shows up on the surface is more likely to be the result of our deeply held beliefs. And that's the conundrum, because we don't see the cause and effect correlation to beliefs we don't know we have to the outcomes they're creating. One of my new favorite sayings, Kathy, is our mindset is a belief system that is perfectly designed to create the outcomes it's creating.
Yep.
And like, I think that's the first step in recognizing, you know, so that will sort of tamp down the impulse to respond inappropriately to an adaptive challenge. Right. So I've got this sort of 5-step model I'm working on to like, so your mindset works just fine if the future looks like the past. The problems arise when the future doesn't look like the past. But because we don't know we have these beliefs and assumptions and values, we typically respond inappropriately to an adaptive challenge. We literally become maladaptive. Right? And how do we do that? Well, we want to go backwards. Right? Let's go back to the way it was. We become angry. We want to lash out and blame others. Sometimes we stick our heads in the sand and just say it's temporary, it's going to go away. I think the most common way that we respond, inappropriately to an adaptive challenge is to double down on prior beliefs. It's called cognitive entrenchment. We just try to do it faster, better, cheaper. We jettison non-essential personnel. We, cut the budgets. We ask everybody to do more and more for less and less, pedal a little bit harder. And that works when it's some sort of a temporary setback, but it's not going to work for an adaptive challenge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the big conundrum. And part of, a big part of our work is training educators to understand the entrepreneurial mindset and how to create these conditions in the classroom that'll cultivate this behavior in students. Nick, I know we're running out of time. If there's any for anyone listening, if have any questions, comments, please dump them in now. We can go a few minutes over, but being respectful of people's time, I want to make sure we're kind of winding down. And Kathy, if you have any final thoughts, I'd love to hear them as well.
I'm thankful for anybody who joined this morning and who feels like they are in agreement with, the things we're trying to talk about. I am forever going to be at the ideation table about how to infuse entrepreneurial mindset thinking in our education systems. Again, I'm trying to start in Orange County with getting our educators to understand it so that they can infuse it in their classroom for their students. But I welcome any ideas offline today that somebody has because I'm all for trying something new. What we're doing is great, but it's not. I think we're just hitting the very surface level of people, and I want to get to the whole system. So that's
yeah. Good. So Kathy, can folks connect with you offline? After the so maybe Nick will put your contact information if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Mm-hmm.
I'll put your email in the follow-up email if that's all right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, perfect. And either Kathleen or Brian, I know they're signed in on the same account name, says we're going to engage Eli for Coastline ROP staff. I am a big believer. I think that's Brian. So that's fantastic.
Awesome. So it was Brian.
Yeah. It was Brian. There you go.
Right. But also, like, Arlene, you have a really important question there. Like, how do you recommend overcoming the resistance of traditional teachers? That's a super important question that I'd like to address. And so it's really a subtle tactic, but it comes from sociology, the work of Everett Rogers. Like, the simple answer is you don't. You find the early adopters who are enthusiastic about it, and you work with them to generate some success, and they will start to influence the early majority and then the late majority. And then there are the laggards, which are like the 15% out on, nothing's going to change them. But that's the nature of change. You find the early adopters, work with them. And that's only going to be about 12 or 13% typically of a population. Find the early adopters, work with them to build success. This is what we've seen with our work with Ice House and all the teachers we've trained around the world. And then the early adopters started sticking their head in the classroom saying, what's going on over there? I'm starting to hear all this buzz. So you think of it in terms of like there's an introductory agent. That's Eli, right? Or that's Kathy Boyd. But the early adopters become the activating agent that convinces the early majority. That's how you bring about change. So it's a great question. I'm very much appreciative of that question, Arlene. Thank you.
Tariq is asking, other than the Ice House program, are there any other mentorship type programs for teachers? Right off the bat, I can tell you that Nifty's program is a pretty good one. The only distinction I would say is that aligns more with that kind of managerial business management side of things. So it's a little further down the pipeline of the entrepreneurship journey than perhaps, what we're talking about, adjusting the mindset.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Other than the Ice House program, are there any?
That's the one I just read.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yep. Okay. All right. I want to make sure we got all the comments and questions covered. Kathy,
Yeah.
this has been a great conversation. I just hope that not only your passion, but your commitment to this effort is contagious.
Me too.
That it spreads like a meme, that other people will recognize that the mindset that got us here is not going to get us there.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And the world has changed in ways that now require everyone to be more innovative and entrepreneurial. We have to learn how to create effective entrepreneurial learning environments. So,
Yeah.
Kathy, thanks so much for joining us today. I can't wait to see where you go with this, and so honored to be working with you.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm so excited about the work I've already done with you guys. And again, hopefully we can infuse a lot more educators. Again, thanks for everyone's time today.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks,
Nick.
everyone. Yep.
Thanks everyone for joining us. See you soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Ciao.